After working with creatives for the last 11 years, I've heard one statement more than any other. I hate marketing. I get it. It can be painful trying to figure out how to market your book or movie or comic. When I started podcasting, I had no clue how to do any of it. I was afraid of doing it wrong, looking like an idiot or making a marketing mistake that I could not recover from. It can be paralyzing. Sound familiar? If it does, let me see if I can help you. I got my MBA in marketing, so you don't have to. Sign up for a free session today to talk about your marketing goals and to see if we're a good fit. If nothing else, you'll get some insights that might ease your mind. Go to southgatesmallbusiness.com and sign up for a free session today. Welcome to Alley Chats. I'm your host, Rob Southgate. Alley Chats is a virtual artist alley featuring interviews with artists, filmmakers, podcasters, writers, really any creative person you might find at a pop culture convention. My goal is to help draw attention to cool people and to hopefully help them get some new fans. I want this podcast to raise up these amazing people and to inspire you, the listener, to chase your dreams as well. You can follow Alley Chats on Facebook and join the conversation. I'll add more social media in the future, but for now, that's the best place to interact with me. You can also email me directly if you would like to be a guest or have a guest suggestion. My email is rob@smgpods.com. Today's guest is Christopher Hawkins. He's a dyed-in-the-wool geek, an avid collector of books, role-playing games, and curiosities. He's also an award-winning author and the former editor of the One Buck Horror Anthology series. And he's a guest at the Books and Brews event coming up this August 3rd in Evanston, Illinois. There's a link in the show notes if you want to check it out. Anyway, here's Chris. So I start every show by saying I'm so excited to have you on because I am. I'm an excitable guy. I love talking to people, but truly today I am really excited. I've got a friend of mine on. I've got Christopher Hawkins, horror author who wrote one of my favorite short story collections. I have said it publicly enough times now that I hope he believes me. So, Chris, truly, welcome to the show.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Rob. I mean, that's high praise.
Well, I mean, if my opinion mattered, it would be high praise. But coming from my house, it matters. I do. I loved this book. I think it's just it was hitting so many scary buttons that I've told everybody about it. So Chris, why don't we start by you telling people who you are, what you do, give them a little background.
Sure. So I'm a horror writer from just outside Chicago. I've written 2 books so far. The short story collection you mentioned, which is called Suburban Monsters, and my debut novel called Downpour, which it's actually won 2 awards so far. It won the Indie Reader Discovery Award in the horror category, and it's won the Book Life Prize from Publishers Weekly. And that was the first horror novel that's ever won that award. So I'm pretty excited.
Wow, I didn't know that. I knew you had
Yeah.
won the awards, but I didn't know that. That's very, very cool, Chris. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So the way we met, I should give a little backstory because we're going to sound familiar here, is I was at C2E2 and I was just doing what I do, networking, talking to people and everything. And there are these 2 guys sitting on the end cap, just sitting there hanging out with their books. And it was
Yep.
Chris
Facing a brick
Hawkins,
wall. Yeah.
facing a brick wall, yes. And Chris Hawkins and Brian Pinkerton. And actually, the person I was talking to was around the corner from them. They got busy with a customer. So I was like, oh, I'll just turn the corner. And I see these guys sitting there and I get in conversation. And the next thing I know is they're the guys I want to talk to. I just had so much fun meeting you guys and then getting to know you more, reading your books. I'm a big fan of both of yours. And I'm about to write to Brian and say, why the hell haven't you scheduled an interview for this Books and Brews series? Because I know he's on it. But it's been great. And we've done some events together. We've got a lot more that will be happening, even though we haven't got anything on the books. I have a feeling our lives are now intertwined, Chris. So let's jump into some of the questions. I have some preset questions, but as you know, because you know me enough, I have no attention span to stick with my questions. So I will be breaking all my own rules very quickly. Let's start with some basic ones though. First of all, what got you writing? What was the thing that made you go, here we go?
Oh man. I don't know how to answer that question because it was so long ago. I mean, I've been writing since I was a teenager, but I've only
Okay.
been publishing for a couple of years. So when I think back to what got me writing, I mean, I think it's just that I've loved I've loved scripted media. Like just a big fan of like the old Twilight Zone and movies, from the 1980s, like The Thing and Ghostbusters, and like the 80s was just this amazing time for like really creative, just kind of weird filmmaking, right? And I kind of fell in love with all of that, and then in high school, kind of got the bug for writing prose, and have just been kind of doing it ever since. I took some breaks to raise my family, but now I'm fully in it, publishing my own stuff.
Well, so what pushed you over the edge to get you publishing?
Well, it was a lot of back and forth with agents. I had three agents, one after another. One ended up leaving very quickly after signing me as a client because they changed careers completely. One I worked with for about a year and a half, and we just weren't able to place the book that I had at the time. And then a third agent who, quite frankly, was kind of a bit of a horror story. I don't want to get too much into it, but yeah, so after going through that process for like a good, I want to say like 6, 7 years, I'm just like, okay, well, this is obviously getting me nowhere. I need to get my stuff out there. I was at a point where nobody was reading my work, and that's never where a writer wants to be. So yeah, so I took the plunge and put out Suburban Monsters, and just the response to it has been huge. And I'm just so thrilled that people are embracing the book, and that people are reading it and taking the time out to like, write me and say that they like it. I mean, that to me is just like all this mind-blowing stuff that I'd always kind of wanted to happen, and now it's sort of there, and it's like I almost don't know what to do with it. It just doesn't feel real, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a great book, and there's so many great ideas in it. That's the thing that gets me is like it's truly scary, and there's just a lot of ideas playing out in it. And I mean, that's the recipe for success here. You know, think about it like the first time you read Books of Blood. I don't know if
Oh
you're
God, yeah, yeah.
your mind was blown because there were so many ideas, so many things going on, and that's truly how I felt reading this.
Oh
Where I was
wow,
like,
thank you.
and I love short story collections. I know they don't sell like regular novels do, but I've always been a short story fan. And when I have a book that feels this way, where I feel like throughout the whole thing, I'm getting just all these crazy ideas that are, I'm never bored. That's a big thing. So there you go. That's why I'm such a big fan.
Well,
Uh,
that's amazing. Thank you.
so okay, child of the '80s.
Yeah.
Look, I've already ditched my questions. Uh, you loved all those movies. What would you say are the three touchstones from that time that you're like, they still live in me?
Yeah, that's actually a lot easier. So the first one is Alien. Just because at the time it was almost like it didn't feel like a real thing. Like, monster movies sort of followed certain rules, and at least the ones that I had seen sort of followed rules. And this just felt like it just kicked the rule book out the window, and you were just in
True.
the hands of madmen, right? Like you had no idea what was going on. It's like, what do you mean it bursts out of their chest? What do you mean it laid an egg down his throat? I mean, it's just, it just felt so, what do you mean it has acid for blood? Like it was just so bonkers, and it all fit together and it all worked. And so yeah, that was a big one for me. The John Carpenter's The Thing
Mm,
was
me too.
also very much in that same vein where you're just like, okay, I'm in the hands of a madman and I have no idea what's going to happen next. And you know, the the level of like, there's a certain kind of gore that you had on film in the 80s that, we've not really been able to get back to. I mean, I think the Terrifier movies sort of hit that kind of like nostalgic button, but the thing was just sort of peak rubber monster special effects, and it still kind of holds up today, which is surprising. But you also kind of have to put it in the frame of like, okay, well, there was no CGI, there was no like, this was as realistic as people could get with puppets, but it's still like so much fun, and still kind of blows my mind a little bit. There's like this unsettled question about whether or not one character has been infected by the creature at the end, and they kind of leave it there. And so there's all kind of debate around that. So it's fun that that's still a question after all these years.
Have you ever, I actually just asked this on another show, so if I'm repeating myself, I'm doing it knowing I am. Have you ever read any of the sequel pitches? Because they were pitching a sequel, and there was also a
No.
TV show,
Oh, wow.
and they are crazy, crazy. They're not just like, we're going to put them back in Antarctica, and now another team shows up. I think the second movie starts that way, like another team shows up,
Hmm.
and then everything goes crazy, and they extract,
Uh-huh.
but they extract it with the thing.
With the guy.
And
Yeah.
so when they get back, it like rips through New York. Because I mean,
Oh,
it's an
that's wild.
infection that it's really
Sure.
an
Yeah.
infection movie.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it goes, instead of 8 people, it's now we've got a city. How fast is that going to wipe out a city? And it's
Oh,
crazy.
sure. Yeah.
And then the TV show is also that same kind of thing, but I think it went to like Europe, and like the whole planet goes nuts. And
Hmm.
I can imagine they didn't greenlight it, because how are they going to make that?
That's a
But
big budget show right
that is
there.
a big budget show. But it sounds absolutely awesome. Somebody needs to make a comic book out of that. I'll read the heck out of that thing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So we got
Um,
Alien, we got The Thing.
we got the thing. I think the third one is probably Poltergeist.
Yeah.
And it's funny because like coming up in August, I have a chance to do a little talk with a few other members of the Chicago Horror Writers Association at Marcus Cinema up in Gurnee, where we're going to be talking about Poltergeist. And
Are you
yeah,
showing the film?
yeah, and that was just like a complete like formative moment for me. And seeing that movie, and the like those just amazing like sort of animated like ghost special effects, and
Yeah.
like the giant ghost puppet and the clown and everything. And just all of these like little bits of imagery that just sort of stick with me, and some of them have found their way into my writing too. Yeah, I mean that just blew my mind when I was young.
So do you think that's something that these things, it's not the exact things, but these images and ideas, do you think
Mhm.
they have influenced how you're writing now, or do you think that maybe a little bit, but really it's the rest of my life?
Yeah, I mean it's a little bit of both really, because it's all kind of material, right? So, if there was a thing that frightened me when I was, 10 years old, and it stuck with me into my adulthood, then yeah, it's probably going to come out in my writing, right?
So the clown under the bed is going to show up in your writing at some point.
Yeah, I have like a terrible thing about clowns. Like, and it's funny because my grandmother, who was amazing, she often made dolls, and one thing that
Oh,
she made for me, you see where this is going, is a clown doll. But it was at the time almost as big as I was. So I
oh,
was
oh
like
God.
maybe I want to say I was like maybe 6 or 7. I was very, very small. And this was like a 3 foot clown doll that she made.
God.
So I remember being terrified of this thing consistently, and piling all my other stuffies around it. Like, okay, well, this is going to be the early warning system. So, like, if the clown comes to life, maybe my stuffies will come to life and save me from this thing. Um, so there's a little bit of clown stuff in Suburban Monsters, not a lot, but
It's
there's a lot
there.
that kind of revolves around that. So yeah, I'd say that that was stuff that kind of stuck with me. And then, a lot of the body horror stuff that I write, came right out of like The Thing and Alien. It's all that was sort of my introduction to it.
Sure.
And then you mentioned Books of Blood. I mean, Clive Barker kind of like took some of those ideas and just kind of ran with them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, it's all kind of part and parcel, right? It all kind of goes into a blender, and then sometimes little things come out, and sometimes they, sometimes they don't.
So was it always horror, or was that what you wanted to write?
Um, yeah, I mean, those are kind of the stories that I have to tell. I do write some stuff that I consider to be a little bit more like speculative fiction fantasy type stuff than straight horror, but I feel like that horror element always kind of creeps in. I've got a book that I'm editing that I hope to have out in March, and that one's really much more of a sort of a science fiction sort of thing, but there's like a lot of horror stuff in it as well. So I don't think I can really ever like get fully away from it, but it's always been, horror is one of those things that plays well with a lot of genres, right?
Yeah.
So it's um you can have a romance and then you can have horror elements in the romance. You can have science fiction, you can have horror elements in the science fiction, like with Alien and the Thing. So there's really no like wrong place for horror. You can do horror comedy, you can do horror, there's a lot of horror erotica out there. There's all kind of, like almost any genre you can think of, you can pair it up with horror and come up with something really cool. So I think that's part of the reason I'm always drawn back to it, is that no matter what kind of story I want to tell, I can still have those horror elements and kind of make it scary.
Want more shows like this? We've got a lot more on the Southgate Media Group Patreon page. Some free, some paid. Plus, there's exclusive content for subscribers only. Follow the link in the show notes or look up Southgate Media Group on Patreon and check out the cool stuff we're doing over there. You won't be sorry. On August 3rd, 2024, Books of Horror is presenting Books and Brews at Double Clutch Brewing Company in Evanston, Illinois. There will be over 40 horror authors for a book signing and meetup from 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. that day. Meet your favorite authors, discover new authors, meet Books of Horror friends in real life, including the author I'm talking with on this podcast. Oh, and I'll be there too. This is an all-ages event. Food, alcohol, and non-alcoholic beverages will be available. No outside food or drinks will be allowed. Search for Books of Horror Presents Books and Brews on Facebook events for more information, or click on the link in the show notes. I hope to see you there. Now, you mentioned that you were scared of your clown.
Oh God.
Were you that kid? Were you like scared of this stuff? So that's why you ended up being a moth to the flame?
Oh God, absolutely. Yeah, we had okay, so back in the early days of cable TV, my uncle was able to get a hold of a cheater box, which was the thing
We
you
had that the
plugged
on
in.
TV
Yeah, one of
box,
those.
right?
Yeah. So you would like plug it in and you would get all the channels,
Yeah,
and you didn't have to pay for them, which was
right,
amazing. And at the time, I didn't realize this is very illegal and I shouldn't talk about it. But I
right.
think the statute of
I
limitations.
think we're okay now.
I think we're good. Yeah. Yeah. If like whatever it was, Sky Cable wants to come after me, the company doesn't exist. Go right ahead. So anyway, yeah, so I would end up getting like, HBO, and when I would watch something like The Thing, I would watch it in like these 10-minute increments. And it was weird because I knew, like, it was this weird kind of like standing on the edge. And like, I also get this weird, maybe it's related, but I get this weird kind of vertigo whenever I'm standing like on a high balcony. If I can see something in the distance that looks like it could be a target, and then my brain is like screaming at me like, yeah, you could make that, you,
Oh
you
my
could change
God.
that.
Oh
Yeah,
my
and it's
God.
this
Don't go to the
weird,
Grand Canyon.
right? Yeah, and so it's this very like odd sort of vertigo, and there's a name for it. It's not anywhere near as uncommon as I originally thought it was, but it's
Okay.
still this very like odd thing. But it was sort of that kind of equivalent with watching a movie where I would be like, okay, this thing's gonna scare me like terribly. I'm going to see how long I can stand it.
Yeah.
And so I would watch in these like 10, 15-minute increments. And same thing with um oh God, there were so many horror movies. Like I remember watching Friday the 13th part 2 with that, where it would be like, okay, well, I'm going to just see how long I can last, and then
Yeah.
okay, all right, I'm going to back off, I'm going to change the channel. And yeah, so I mean there's a weird push pull to it, and I think that's something that happens in a lot of good horror stories too, where you're like repelled by it, but you're also drawn to it. So, that push pull is super important in the writing too.
I have a funny story that I'm going to share.
Hmm.
Uh, you mentioned Friday the 13th part 2. So I went to
Hmm.
my friend Andy and Eddie's. They live kitty corner to where I live in the house I grew up in. So kitty corner to where I'm at now. And we were young and they were, you know, it was HBO or one of those was showing Friday the 13th part two. And we were like, yes, we're going to watch this horror movie. And we
Right. Yeah.
did. And we scared the absolute hell out of each other.
Hmm.
We're all terrified. And I was the kid who like I was drawn to it and I was so scared of all this stuff, but I just loved it. So I call my parents and I said, "Hey, I'm coming home. If you could just watch for me." Okay.
Hmm.
That would never happen.
Yeah.
But it was dark out and I
Oh,
just
yeah.
watched Friday the 13th and they knew.
Hmm.
So they decided to screw with me.
Oh, no.
So I said, I'm coming home to watch my mom. Oh, of course, honey, I'll watch for you. So I go outside and my mom's standing on the porch and I instantly know it's like you said, you can see it in a distance. I'm like, crap, something's going to happen because I can tell my
Yeah.
mom's like, come on. And I'm
Hmm.
going, where's dad? Oh, he's inside. Come on. I get all the way up right by the front door and my dad jumps out of a tree.
Oh,
He
God.
had to be 6 feet up in the air,
Oh, no.
hidden, jumps out, scared the absolute crap out of me.
Oh, my God. That's borderline child abuse right there.
Oh, no, I have another story. You want to hear another story about my dad? I don't get to tell these on here. You and I are friends. I can tell you another
All
terrifying
right.
story.
Yeah, go for it.
So, my mom, now I'm a little older now. My mom, who they didn't watch horror, I always did, but they didn't like stop me or anything. They thought it was, you know, fine. Uh, they were showing Halloween and she said she'd watch it with me. And I was so excited. I'm going to watch Halloween with my mom, right? My dad, man, I don't want it. I'm not interested.
Hmm.
So we watched the movie. And of course, we're terrified. My
Hmm.
mom, especially, I had already seen it, so I knew. But my mom was like, oh,
Hmm.
all the lights are out in the house. My dad, I'm like, Dad, no answer.
No, no.
Mom, where is he? Maybe he left. Like, I
Mm.
see the car outside. He hasn't left. She's like, I don't know where he is. She starts screaming, George, where are you? Nothing. Nothing.
Hmm.
So I'm brave boy. I go upstairs and I start turning all the lights on.
Hmm.
Nothing. So much so that she gets in bed in her, you know, in their room. I'm in my room. I've got a TV. I'm watching TV and I kind of forget about all this.
Okay.
And she's like, I don't know where your dad went, but he is not here. We looked everywhere, right?
Hmm.
Apparently not. Because after about an hour, he reaches out from under my covers and grabs my ankle.
Oh, my
I
God.
swear to God, I mean, I think I may have died. This may be an afterlife conversation we're having right now. The
Okay.
scariest thing ever. How did I not become a horror writer from what my dad did to
Wow.
me? I mean,
That's wow.
Chris, you say borderline psychotic. There it is.
Yeah. I mean, God, just like, yeah. Wow.
I mean, it gave me a fun childhood.
Well, fun is one way to put it, I guess.
Right. Right. Okay. So you deal with a lot of horror authors.
Mhm.
Here's a question I haven't asked anybody on here yet. What is
Okay.
the one piece of advice that you would give horror authors today?
Like specifically to horror authors.
Somebody comes up, "Hey, I'm a horror author. I'm
Uh-huh.
I'm trying to, you know, do my thing. What advice do you have for me?"
Um, yeah, I mean, honestly, I think probably the biggest advice that I would give them is to go indie because there's been this sort of explosion in horror writing over the past couple years, and it's all within the indie sphere. So,
Okay.
you have a few writers who have, like sort of made that jump to, more traditional publishing, but a lot of them began in indie publishing, right? So it's almost like the indie sphere, I guess, has kind of become sort of like almost like a farm team in baseball, right? Like where it's where people get to try out new ideas. It's where people get to kind of grow in their creativity. Whereas the people who are publishing, um, in the more traditional sphere, and, don't get me wrong, I'm very, very envious of all of those people. But there's a lot of pressure to sort of do the same, right?
Right.
So it's like, here's the book that was the hit for you. Now we need that same thing, but different, right?
Right.
And there are a lot of writers who really excel at that and, have really like made these amazing careers for themselves. But in the indie sphere, people are way more open to, okay, well, here I'm going to put out this experimental novella. I have no idea what it is, but then, maybe you've read my other book and you want to pick it up anyway. And those sort of stories help to, they end up finding, I think, a wider audience or even an audience at all that they wouldn't have in the more traditional sphere. So it's a time to experiment. It's a time to really like find your voice, and also to build your audience and connect with people who want to read your work. So yeah, I would say my advice would be to just put something out there.
Just do it.
Make an indie book. Yeah, it's easier now than it's ever been. So yeah, I mean, there's really nothing holding people back.
So you mentioned crossing genres
Hmm.
and how horror can, and I agree. I mean, horror and romance, those can fit into any story you've got going.
Hmm.
You know, it's even if it's just the spice to it, you
Right.
can't eat something bland. You got to have some spice, right?
Exactly. Right.
Do you think that horror writers can learn anything from those genres rather than being the spice? Like you read the Shannara, can you pull
Mhm.
from that into your writing?
Yeah, I think you can. It's I would always recommend that if you're going to be writing horror, you should still read widely. You should never, just read within the genre that you're writing. You should read as much as you can, as widely as you can. Every genre you can get into, every nonfiction book you can get into. Um, all of that sort of becomes raw material for the story that you're trying to tell. So, maybe, and this is a pretty obvious example, but, maybe you've read a lot of Regency romance and you want to do like a horror Bridgerton, right? Or you want to do the next Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, right? Um, or even something more subtle than either of those things. You could take elements from that time period and build them into a horror novel. If you're doing science fiction, or if you're reading a lot of science fiction, you can take some of the, magical elements and incorporate them into horror. So there's really nothing that is off limits.
Mhm.
Again, horror, it kind of goes both ways, right? Like you can put horror into any sort of other genre, but you can also bring those other genres in to inform the horror. So, even if you're doing, a typical, uh, like a slasher book or a haunted house book, you can bring in those fantastical elements. You can bring in those romance elements. You can bring in different time periods and different styles of storytelling. It all meshes together.
So, uh, i- i- this is another one that's kind of like my earlier question, but I'm really interested to hear what you say. Right now, who are the three horror writers? Give me your top three that you're interested in right now.
Oh, got it. We talking about ones that are publishing right
Take it
now?
how you want it.
All right. Um, yeah, I always feel like I'm not up to date enough because I'll hear about a writer and then their book will end up on my TBR pile for like 2 years.
Okay, so it doesn't
So
have to be super current. It just has to be what's current to you. What are three
yeah, I
writers that you're
mean,
like, these are the
yeah,
guys that I'm interested in?
yeah, I've been catching up on Michael McDowell lately. And for those people who don't know him, he was actually the screenwriter for Beetlejuice. But leading up to that, he wrote a lot of paperback originals, and he wrote this amazing, I think it's a 6-part series called Blackwater. And it's just absolutely fantastic. He has a lot of standalone stuff that's being published through Valancourt Press right now. Um, so yeah, I mean, he's been a big, uh, like sort of recent influence in my work. He just has this amazing knack for description and the way he paces out his stories. It's just everything is, he's just so good at what he does. And tragically,
Sure.
he died, I think in the late 80s, if I'm remembering correctly. But yeah, I'm still kind of catching up on the stuff that Valancourt is putting out, and it's just all fantastic. Um, and then I'm trying not to be boring, but all of my
You don't worry
influences
about
are
anything
kind
you
of
say is not
boring.
going to be boring.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk like, like it's going to be the ones that everybody points to, right? It's going to be like Richard Matheson. It's going to be Edgar Allan Poe. It's going to be Like Arthur Machen is another one. You know, Rod Serling, Ray Bradbury, all of the writers that I read during my childhood around the same time that I was watching those scary movies on cable.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that sort of became the foundation for the work that I do now. So, Clive Barker is certainly up there. Stephen King is like way up there. He's another one that
Everybody says Stephen King. How do you not, right?
well, yeah, and he's another great example of someone who's kind of transcended the genre, right? Because he started off making these horror novels, and he still does, but he's also branched off into these really amazing fantasy books and into crime fiction, and the guy's just, I mean, he's just amazing.
Yeah.
And even when he's not at like the top of his form, he's still excellent.
Yeah.
And that to me is
Right.
amazing. It's like, okay, well, you buy a Stephen King book and you're like, okay, this is at least going to be interesting to read. But then every 5 or 6 novels, it's like, well, this is a classic. This
Yeah.
is
When he hits it out of the park, which he
right,
does, it's
right.
incredible.
Yeah. And yeah, so I'm consistently in awe of just how consistently good he is and how quickly he can put stuff out. I mean, I I don't know. I always feel inadequate kind of measured. I guess every writer feels inadequate measured up against that. But
Yeah, he put
um,
out 3 books during this interview, so if that
I
tells you
think you're
anything.
right. Yeah, yeah, and they were all like doorstops. Um, so yeah, I mean, those are the ones that really like kind of stuck with me. So I know that's more than three, but
That's okay. I didn't say you were good at math.
no, I never have been. That's why I write.
So, okay. You can meet Chris at Books and Brews. It's a double clutch brewing company in Evanston, Illinois, August 3rd. Buy his books, get his signatures, take a selfie with him, bring him some clown paraphernalia, scare the hell out of him.
Right.
I
Yeah,
mean, there's so
everyone
many
dress up
things
as
you can
clowns.
do.
Sure.
Everybody come dressed as a clown. Yeah. I have a friend who's a musician, and he doesn't like clowns at all. And he actually, in one of the lyrics in his song is it's either I'm scarier or I'm sadder than 10,000 clowns. But every time I hear it, I'm like, oh, I know what he means because he
Yeah.
hates clowns. And
Mhm.
then on the other side of it, I'm friends with a professional clown I was in a commercial with.
Oh wow.
And yeah, and he gets really upset when people talk about this stuff because he's like, this is
Yeah.
his profession and he's
Oh
really into it.
sure. Yeah.
But then he's like, if you get him into the conversation about it, he's like, yeah, there's a lot of creeps doing it, which they give us all a bad
Right.
name.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's one of those weird careers,
Yeah, like I'm sure
you know?
90% of them are fine, but then 10% are like John Wayne Gacy, right?
That
So
10% is not good.
right.
You know what? All I can say to them is just stop it. Go do something else.
Right.
We don't
Right.
need you. So anyway, Books and Brews at Double Clutch Brewing Company, August 3rd. Get your tickets. The links are in the show notes. I think the afternoon is free, so you don't even have to get tickets. And like I said, come up and meet Chris and buy his books and follow him on a social media, which will be in the show notes. Get his newsletter. And yeah, Chris, this was great. I was so happy when I saw you signed up for an interview. This kind of made my day.
Well, thank you, Rob. It's been awesome as always. Thanks so much. I look forward to seeing you at the show.
Oh, I'll be there. It would really help me out if you would rate and review this show on whatever platform you use to listen to this podcast. Good reviews help others find the show, which ultimately helps the people I've interviewed get more exposure. You can connect with me on social media or via email. All the links are found in the show notes. If you like this show, you'll like other shows from Southgate Media Group as well, such as Read Between the Lines, a podcast featuring insightful interviews with some of the hottest authors out there, or Go Fund This, a podcast where we interview people about their amazing crowdfunding projects. You can find our shows wherever you listen to podcasts, so give them a try. And if you like what you hear, don't forget to rate and review our shows. It really helps other people find them and keep our team inspired. Alley Chats is a production of Southgate Media Group, hosted, produced, and edited by me, Rob Southgate. Thanks again for listening to Alley Chats.